In a world where billionaires seem to operate above the law, what happens when a 22-year-old waitress decides one has finally crossed the line? This isn't a fairy tale. It's the story of Clara Lawson. A young woman armed with nothing but her integrity and the day she single-handedly took on the heir to the Thorn Empire in the middle of a busy New York diner. She expected to be fired, to be sued, to be crushed by the immense power she dared to challenge. What she never ever expected was what came next. Forget what you think you know about power and money. The real story, the one that unfolded behind closed doors and in the deafening silence of a private helicopter, is more shocking than you can ever imagine. The Gilded Spoon wasn't just a diner. It was a relic, a stubborn anchor of authenticity in the ever-changing tides of Lower Manhattan. Its checkered floors were worn from a century of footsteps. The vinyl on its booths was cracked like an old smile, and it smelled perpetually of strong coffee, sizzling bacon, and Maria's secret recipe apple pie. For Clara Lawson, it was more than a workplace. It was a sanctuary, a predictable rhythm of clattering plates and friendly chatter that stood in stark contrast to the chaotic symphony of her life outside its doors. At 22, Clara was carrying a weight far beyond her years. By day, she was a waitress balancing orders with a grace that belied her exhaustion. By night, she was a student of architecture at Cooper Union. Her textbooks splayed across her tiny apartment, dreams of steel and glass rising from the pages. Every dollar she earned was split 3 ways: tuition rent, and the ever-growing pile of medical bills for her younger brother Liam, whose battle with a rare autoimmune disease was a silent, relentless storm in their lives. The Gilded Spoon, with its steady hours, and Maria's understanding eyes, was the one place she could breathe. That Tuesday began like any other. The lunch rush was a controlled chaos of tourists wanting a real New York experience, and regulars who had been eating at the same counter for 50 years. Clara moved through it all with unpracticed ease, her mind a complex Rolodex of who wanted their coffee black and who was allergic to onions. The bell above the door chimed, but this time it felt different. It wasn't the cheerful jingle of a regular or the curious tinkle of a tourist. It was a sharp, demanding sound, as if the door itself had been shoved open with contempt. In walked Julian Thorne. He wasn't just a customer. He was an event. Heir to the Thorne Global Properties, his fortune a name synonymous with half the skyline of New York, Julian moved with an aura of frictionless entitlement. He was handsome in a way that seemed machine-tooled perfect teeth, a jawline that could cut glass and eyes that scanned the room, not to see people, but to assess obstacles. He was flanked by 2 sycophants, Caden and Bryce, whose own expensive clothes seemed like costumes they wore to orbit his son. The diner's comfortable hum faltered. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the booths. A table. Now Julian snapped, not at anyone in particular, but at the air itself, expecting it to comply. Maria, the diner's owner, and a woman whose 60 years had taught her to spot trouble from a mile away, started to move from behind the counter. But Clara, seeing the most desirable booth, was currently occupied by an elderly couple celebrating their anniversary, stepped forward. "Welcome to the Gilded Spoon," she said, her voice even and professional. "It will be just a few minutes for a booth, but we have space at the counter right now if you'd like." Julian's eyes landed on her, and it was like being examined under a microscope. He didn't look at her. He appraised her. A slow, dismissive scan from her worn-out sneakers to the slight fraying on her apron, lingering for a moment too long on her face and chest. "I don't do counters," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. He pointed a finger adorned with a heavy gold ring at the anniversary couple. "Get them out. I want that one." Caden and Bryce snickered. Clara felt a familiar hot spark of anger ignite in her chest. It was the same anger she felt when a professor dismissed her ideas, or when an insurance agent spoke about Liam's condition in terms of costs and liabilities. "Sir, those customers were here first," she said, her tone hardening just a fraction. "As I said, it will only be a few minutes. I can get you some drinks while you wait." "Did you not hear me?" Julian took a step closer, invading her personal space. His cologne, a sharp, eye-watering scent of sandalwood and arrogance, washed over her. "I said I want that table. Your job is to make it happen. Or are you as stupid as this place looks?" From across the room, Clara saw Chloe, a younger waitress who was still in high school, watching with wide, terrified eyes. She saw Maria's hands tighten on a dish rag. She saw the happy anniversary couple, now looking uncomfortable, their quiet celebration spoiled. This man wasn't just a customer. He was a poison, seeping into the atmosphere of the one place she felt safe. Clara took a small, deliberate step back, reclaiming her space. "My job is to serve customers, not to throw them out for you. You will have to wait like everyone else." For a moment, Julian looked genuinely stunned, as if a piece of furniture had just spoken back to him. The shock quickly curdled into rage. His face, usually a mask of bored superiority, flushed a deep red. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he hissed, his voice low and menacing. "I know exactly who you are," Clara replied, her voice just as quiet, but ringing with a clarity that cut through the tension. "And in here, you're just a customer. One who is being loud, disrespectful, and is currently at the back of the line." The entire diner was now silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. Julian's friends, Caden and Bryce, had stopped smirking. They looked nervous, glancing at the door, as if plotting an escape. They had seen Julian's temper before. Julian's eyes narrowed into slits. He saw this not as a simple disagreement, but as a fundamental challenge to his existence. He, Julian Thorne, was being denied something. He laughed a short, ugly bark. "Let's try this another way," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick wad of cash, peeling off several $100 bills and throwing them on the floor between them. "For your trouble. Now get the geezers out of my seat." The money lay on the checkered tiles, a vulgar stain on the diner's simple decency. That was it, the final line. This wasn't about a table anymore. It was about human dignity. Clara looked from the money on the floor to Julian's smug face. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words were cold and hard as steel. "Pick it up," she said. What he scoffed. "Pick it up," she repeated, enunciating each word. "And then get out of this diner. We don't serve people like you here. Your money means nothing." Julian stared at her, his jaw working silently. The public humiliation was more than he could bear. He was used to people cowering, apologizing, fawning. He was not used to being commanded. With a snarl, he lunged forward, not towards the money, but towards her. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh like claws. "You're fired, you little." But the sentence was never finished. Reacting on pure instinct, born of years of protecting herself and her brother, Clara twisted her arm, with a sharp, practiced movement breaking his grip. With her other hand, she gave him a firm, decisive shove on the chest. It wasn't a violent push, but it was so unexpected and so perfectly balanced that the arrogant billionaire caught off guard, stumbled backward, crashing into a stack of high chairs near the door with a loud clatter. Silence. Absolute pin-drop silence. Julian Thorne lay in a heap of plastic and chrome. His $1,000 suit jacket twisted his face, a mask of pure, unadulterated fury and shock. Caden and Bryce froze, their faces pale. Clara stood tall, her arm throbbing where he had grabbed it, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pointed a trembling but resolute finger towards the open door. I said she announced, her voice ringing through the cavernous silence. "Get out!" Without a word, a humiliated Julian scrambled to his feet. He shot her a look of such venomous hatred it could have curdled milk, a silent promise of ruin. Then he turned and stormed out, his 2 lackeys scurrying after him like frightened rats. The bell on the door chimed softly as it closed, leaving a stunned diner in its wake. Clara stood there for a long moment, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Then slowly, the enormity of what she had just done began to crash down upon her. She hadn't just kicked out a rude customer. She had kicked out Julian Thorne. She had declared war on an empire. The silence that followed Julian Thorne's chaotic exit was heavier than any noise. It was a vacuum filled with the unspoken fears of everyone present. The regulars stared, a mixture of awe and terror on their faces. The tourists looked like they had gotten a far more real New York experience than they'd bargained for. Chloe was still frozen by the coffee machine, her hands covering her mouth. It was Maria who broke the spell. She walked slowly from behind the counter, her face unreadable. She bent down, not with any sense of civility, but with a weary dignity, and picked up the $100 bills Julian had thrown. She walked over to the tip jar by the register and stuffed them inside. "That's for Chloe's college fund," she announced to the room, her voice firm. Then she turned to Clara, and for a terrifying second, Clara thought she saw disappointment in her eyes. She braced herself for the inevitable words. "You're fired. Do you know what you've done?" Instead, Maria gently took Clara's arm, turning it over to look at the red marks where Julian's fingers had dug in. "Go put some ice on that, honey," she said, softly. "I'll handle the floor." The simple act of kindness was almost Clara's undoing. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving a cold, creeping dread in its place. She retreated to the small, cluttered back office, her legs feeling like lead. She sank onto a wobbly chair, the enormity of her actions washing over her in nauseating waves. She hadn't just stood up for herself and Chloe. She had potentially signed the death warrant for the Gilded Spoon. A man like Julian Thorne didn't just get mad, he got even. He wouldn't key her car or leave a bad Yelp review. He would use the full, crushing weight of his family's fortune to obliterate whatever stood in his way. He would bury the diner in lawsuits. He would find out where she lived. He would discover her enrollment at Cooper Union and use his influence to have her expelled. And Liam. The thought of her brother, so fragile and dependent on the stability she fought so hard to provide, made her stomach clench with a visceral fear. For the next 2 hours, every time the bell on the diner door chimed, Clara flinched. She expected lawyers in sharp suits serving papers. She expected city inspectors suddenly finding a dozen violations. She expected Julian himself returning with a smug look on his face to watch the diner be shut down. The lunch rush ended. The afternoon lull settled in. Maria came into the office and sat down opposite her, placing a cup of chamomile tea on the desk. "You did the right thing," Clara Maria said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "I might have destroyed your business, Maria." Clara whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "He's a thorn. They don't lose." "There are things more important than a business," Maria replied, her gaze steady. "Respect, dignity. This place was built on that. If we lose it because we stood up for what's right, then so be it. We'll go down with our heads held high." Clara wanted to believe her, wanted to draw strength from her unwavering resolve, but the fear was a cold knot in her stomach. That evening on her subway ride home, she pulled out her phone and, against her better judgment, Googled Julian Thorne. The results were a sickening montage of tabloid photos, Julian on yachts with models. Julian stumbling out of exclusive clubs, Julian at charity galas, with his father, the formidable Alistair Thorne. Alistair. He was the real power, a man who had built a global empire from the ground up. He was often described in business journals as ruthless a visionary and intensely private. In every photo, he had an expression of stoic, unreadable calm. He looked like a man who could move mountains with a single phone call. He was the father of the man she had just publicly humiliated. Clara's tiny apartment felt less like a home that night, and more like a flimsy shelter about to be hit by a hurricane. She tried to study, but the words on the page blurred. The intricate designs of suspension bridges and cantilevered roofs seemed a world away. All she could see was Julian's face contorted with rage. She called her brother a nightly ritual. Liam's voice, though weak, was always a beacon. "How was your day, Clara?" he asked. "It was eventful," she said, trying to keep her voice light. "Just another day in the big city." "Did you ace that physics midterm?" he pressed. Always her biggest cheerleader. Still waiting on the grade, she lied, the guilt twisting inside her. She couldn't tell him. She couldn't add this worry to his already heavy burden. They talked for another 10 minutes about his physical therapy, about a new documentary he'd watched, about anything and everything except the storm that was gathering just over her horizon. The next day, Clara walked to the diner with a sense of impending doom. Every black car that passed seemed to slow down. Every person in a suit looked like a lawyer. She pushed open the door to the Gilded Spoon, her heart in her throat. The diner was quiet. It was the dead time between the breakfast and lunch rushes. Maria was behind the counter polishing glasses. She looked up and gave Clara a small, reassuring smile. Nothing had happened. Yet. The morning passed in a haze of tense anticipation. Clara went through the motions, refilling coffee, taking orders. But her senses were on high alert. At precisely 11:45 a.m., it happened. A car pulled up outside. But it wasn't a flashy sports car like Julian's. It was a long, impossibly black Mercedes Maybach S680, a vehicle that whispered wealth rather than screamed it. The tinted windows were so dark, they looked like polished obsidian. A chauffeur in a grey suit got out, opened the rear door, and stood at attention. Out stepped a man who could only be Alistair Thorne. He was older than in the photos, perhaps, in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair swept back from a high forehead. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that cost more than a year of Clara's tuition. But it wasn't his clothes or his car that commanded attention. It was his presence. He had an aura of stillness, of immense, condensed power. Where Julian was a raging fire, his father was the cold, silent weight of a glacier. He didn't look angry. He didn't look at all. He simply walked to the door of the diner, the chauffeur holding it open for him, and stepped inside. The bell chimed. This time, It sounded like a funeral knell. Maria's hand, which was polishing a glass, froze mid-wipe. Chloe, who was setting tables, dropped a fork with a loud clatter. Clara, standing by the register, felt the blood drain from her face. The hurricane had arrived. Alistair Thorne's gaze swept the room, once taking in every detail of the worn-out diner. His eyes weren't disdainful like his son's. They were analytical, as if he were assessing a potential acquisition. Finally, his eyes, the color of cold steel, landed on Clara. There was no flicker of recognition, yet she knew he knew exactly who she was. He walked towards her, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the tiled floor. He stopped a few feet away. His silence was more intimidating than any threat Julian could ever have uttered. Clara's heart was pounding so hard, she could feel it in her ears. This was it. The end of the line. She braced herself, ready for the explosion. Alistair Thorne looked at her for a long, silent moment. Then he spoke. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone, the sound of old money and absolute authority. He didn't say, "You're fired." He didn't say, "You'll be hearing from my lawyers." He said, "Miss Lawson, I'm Alistair Thorne. You and I need to have a conversation." The air in the gilded spoon grew thick, heavy with the unspoken power Alistair Thorne radiated. Maria began to move protectively towards Clara, but a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of Clara's head stopped her. This was her battle. She had started it, and she would see it through. Mr. Thorne. Clara said, her voice surprisingly steady, despite the tremor in her hands. She met his gaze, directly refusing to be the first to look away. In his eyes, she saw none of his son's petulance, only an unnerving, calculating intelligence. "May we sit?" he asked. It was a question, but it had the weight of a command. He gestured towards the very booth his son had tried to claim, which was now fatefully empty. Clara nodded, her mind racing. What was his angle? A public dressing down, a meticulously planned legal threat delivered in person for maximum effect. She led the way to the booth, every nerve ending screaming. Sliding onto the worn vinyl opposite a man whose net worth could probably buy the entire city block, felt surreal. Alistair Thorne sat placing his hands, palms down on the Formica tabletop. They were strong, clean hands that had clearly never washed a dish, but had undoubtedly signed deals that shaped skylines. He didn't seem to notice the small crack in the table or the faint stickiness from a long-gone syrup spill. He was entirely focused on her. "Maria," he called out, his voice calm but resonant. "Could we have 2 black coffees, please?" Maria, ever the professional, simply nodded and went to prepare them. The act of ordering coffee, so mundane and normal, was disorienting. It was a power play, Clara realized. He was establishing control, turning this into his meeting in his time. He waited until Maria had delivered the coffees and retreated to a safe distance before he spoke again. "I was given a rather colorful account of an incident that took place here yesterday." He began, his voice even. "My son Julian seems to be under the impression that he was grievously wronged." Clara gripped her mug, the heat a small, grounding comfort. "Your son was harassing my staff and treating other customers with contempt. When I asked him to leave, he refused and became aggressive." She decided against mentioning that he had grabbed her. Let him bring it up. She wouldn't sound like she was making excuses. Alistair took a slow sip of his coffee. He seemed to genuinely consider her words. "My son has a misplaced sense of his own importance, a symptom of a life lived without friction. He believes the Thorne name is a key that opens all doors. He has yet to learn that some doors, the ones worth opening, require a key of character. This was not what Clara expected. She had prepared for threats, for anger, for dismissal, not philosophy. He threw money on the floor and demanded I kick out an elderly couple for him, Clara stated, keeping her tone factual. That's not a lack of friction, Mr. Thorne. That's a lack of basic human decency. A flicker of something, was it? Disappointment, respect passed through Alistair's steely eyes. Indeed, he said, nodding slowly. Decency. An undervalued asset in today's market. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intensifying. Tell me, Miss Lawson, why did you do it? And don't give me a simple answer. I am not a simple man. The question hung in the air. He wasn't asking about the shove. He was asking about the entire sequence. The refusal, the confrontation, the defiance. He was probing her motives, looking for the bedrock beneath her actions. Clara thought for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She thought of Liam, of the quiet dignity of her regulars, of Maria's unwavering support. Because this place, she said, gesturing to the diner around them, matters. Maybe not to people like you or your son, but it matters. It's a community. People feel safe here. Respected. Your son walked in and tried to shatter that with his money and his name. He tried to make Chloe, a 17-year-old girl, saving for community college, feel worthless. He tried to make the Hendersons feel like their anniversary was an inconvenience. He wasn't just being a jerk, Mr. Thorne. He was trying to prove that his power meant their dignity was worthless. She took a deep breath, the words pouring out now. I didn't do it because I'm brave or reckless. I did it because if you let someone like that chip away at the decency of a place, it rots from the inside out. And I won't let this place rot. Not for any price. Alistair Thorne was silent for a full minute. He stared into his coffee cup as if the secrets of the universe were swirling in the black liquid. Clara's heart hammered. Had she said too much? Had she just insulted him by proxy? Finally, he looked up and his expression had changed. The cold, analytical mask had softened, replaced by a look of profound, weary gravity. For 30 years, he said, his voice dropping to a near confessional tone, I have tried to teach my son that lesson. I have tried to explain that our name, our wealth, is not a shield for bad behavior, but a responsibility. It is a tool. It can be used to build great things, or it can be used as a club to beat people into submission. He has consistently chosen to see it as a club. He sighed a sound that seemed to come from the very depths of his soul. I have failed. My son is a disappointment. He has a brilliant mind for numbers and acquisitions, but the foundation is cracked. He lacks a moral framework. He paused, then looked directly at Clara. You, Miss Lawson, possess that framework. You have a foundation of solid bedrock. I saw it on the security footage. Clara froze. Security footage? Of course, Alistair said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. My security chief had the footage from this diner's camera within an hour of the incident. I saw the entire thing. The condescension. The money on the floor. I saw him grab your arm. And I saw you defend yourself and your establishment with a composure I have not seen in my own boardroom. He leaned back, a calculated move. The interrogation was over. The proposition was about to begin. I did not come here to apologize for my son, Miss Lawson. An apology from me would be meaningless, and I did not come here to threaten you. That would be beneath me. I came here with an offer. Clara's mind braced for it. A check. A non-disclosure agreement with a hefty payout to make this all go away. I am flying to check on a new construction project upstate this afternoon, he said. A complex cantilevered design for a new corporate retreat. I'm told you are a student of architecture at Cooper Union. Clara's breath caught in her throat. How did he know that? Of course. A man like him could find out her blood type in 5 minutes if he wanted to. The helicopter leaves from the West 30th Street heliport in 1 hour, he continued, ignoring her shock. I want you to come with me. I want to show you the project. I want you to look at the plans. And I want to continue this conversation where we won't be interrupted. Clara was speechless. It was the most bizarre, unexpected twist she could have possibly imagined. A helicopter ride to see an architectural project. Was this a bribe, a threat disguised as a reward? A test? Why, she finally managed to ask her voice, a hoarse whisper. Alistair Thorne stood up, placing a crisp new $100 bill on the table, enough to cover 2 coffees 1,000 times over. Because Miss Lawson, he said, his steel-grey eyes locking onto hers. People with foundations as strong as yours are a rare and valuable commodity. I want to understand what you're built from. The helicopter leaves in 1 hour. A car is waiting for you outside. He turned and walked out of the diner, leaving Clara in the booth, her mind reeling the scent of expensive cologne and the impossible weight of his offer hanging in the air. She had an hour to make a choice that she knew with absolute certainty would change her life forever. The 60 minutes Alistair Thorne had given her felt like both an eternity and a split second. Clara's mind was a maelstrom of conflicting thoughts. One voice, the voice of caution and fear, screamed that this was a trap, a powerful, angry billionaire luring her to a secluded location. It was the plot of a thriller, not a real-life opportunity. He could be planning anything to intimidate her, to threaten her family, in a place where no one could hear her scream to force her into signing a document that would ruin her. But another voice, the voice of her ambition, the one that had pushed her to apply to Cooper Union against all odds, whispered that this was the chance of a lifetime. Alistair Thorne wasn't just a billionaire. He was a master builder. Thorne Global Properties was at the apex of architectural innovation. To see a project of that magnitude, to speak with the man who commissioned it, it was an opportunity that most architecture students could only dream of. It was a glimpse into the world she was fighting so desperately to enter. Her eyes fell on Maria, who was watching her with a worried expression. "What do you think?" Clara asked, her voice barely audible. Maria wiped her hands on her apron. "I think men like that don't make offers without a reason. He's not interested in your opinion on architecture, honey. He's interested in you. The question is why. Be careful. A lion may praise a sheep, but it's still a lion." Maria's words were wise, but they also held a challenge. Clara had never been a sheep. She looked at her reflection in the dark coffee. She saw a tired waitress in a cheap uniform, but inside she was the architect of her own life. She had to be. For Liam. With a deep breath, she stood up. "I have to go." She ran to the back, shrugging off her apron and grabbing her worn backpack, the one that held her sketchbook and pencils. It felt like a shield. She was no longer just a waitress. She was an architecture student. She was going to meet him on her terms. The black Maybach was still idling at the curb, a silent, imposing beast. The chauffeur, a man with the impassive face of a bodyguard, opened the door for her, without a word. The interior was like a private jet, plush leather-polished wood, and a silence so profound it felt like being in a different dimension from the noisy street outside. The ride to the heliport was a blur of traffic and anxiety. Clara's heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. When they arrived, Alistair Thorne was waiting, standing beside a sleek black Augusta Westland AW-139 helicopter, its rotors beginning to spin with a low, powerful thrum. He had changed from his suit into a more casual but equally expensive cashmere sweater and slacks. He looked less like a corporate titan and more like a king surveying his domain. "Punctual, another valuable asset," he commented as she approached, handing her a pair of noise-cancelling headphones. The flight was an experience in sensory overload. As the helicopter lifted off, the familiar grid of Manhattan sprawled below her like a living blueprint. It was the city she loved, the city she dreamed of shaping, seen from a perspective of incredible power and privilege. She could see the iconic skyscrapers, some of which bore the Thorne name, piercing the clouds. It was intoxicating and terrifying. Alistair pointed out landmarks not as a tour guide, but as a general reviewing his territory. Through the headphones, his voice was a calm, clear presence in the roaring chaos of the rotors. "Look there," he said, pointing to a new, impossibly thin residential tower near Central Park. "Engineered support structures. We had to sink caissons 200 feet into the Manhattan schist. A foundation problem. Everything Miss Lawson always comes back to the foundation." Clara found her voice. "The lateral load must be immense. You'd need a significant tuned mass damper to handle the wind shear at that height." Alistair turned to look at her, a genuine spark of surprise in his eyes. He had expected a passenger. He had gotten a peer, however junior. "We do. A 600-ton pendulum. You've done your reading." "I'm not just a waitress, Mr. Thorne," she replied, her confidence growing. In this realm, the realm of design and structure, she wasn't out of her depth. They flew for another 20 minutes, leaving the city behind for the lush green expanse of the Hudson Valley. They finally descended towards a clearing in a dense forest where a stunning structure was taking shape. It was a building of glass, steel, and dark wood that seemed to jut out from a granite cliff face suspended over the trees below. It was daring, beautiful, and a breathtaking feat of engineering. They landed, and as they walked towards the construction site, Alistair began to talk. He spoke of stress points and materials, of the challenges of building on a sheer rock face, of the interplay between light and shadow. Clara listened enthralled, interjecting with questions about the structural integrity and the environmental impact, her sketchbook already in hand, her pencil flying across the page. They stood on a temporary platform overlooking the valley, the view majestic. The air was crisp and clean. It was a world away from the greasy air of the Gilded Spoon. "What do you think?" Alistair asked. "It's audacious," Clara said honestly. "It defies gravity. It's a statement." "And what is the statement?" he pressed. "That with a strong enough anchor," she said, looking at the massive steel bolts drilled deep into the cliffside, you can build anything. You can reach out into the void without fear." Alistair smiled, a rare, genuine smile that briefly transformed his severe features. "Precisely. And that Miss Lawson brings me to the real reason we are here." He turned to face her, the wind whipping at his silver hair. The pleasantries were over. The test had arrived. "I have an offer for you, and it has nothing to do with a helicopter ride." I am prepared to pay for the remainder of your tuition at Cooper Union. All of it. Furthermore, I am offering you a paid senior-level internship at Thorn Global Properties, working directly with our lead design team. You will have access to projects and minds that will put you a decade ahead of your peers. I will also take care of your brother's medical expenses. All of them. In their entirety. Clara's world tilted on its axis. Every single one of her burdens. Tuition. Liam's health, her future, was being lifted in a single sentence. It was a rescue, a golden ticket, a dream so fantastical she couldn't have dared to imagine it. Her mind instantly went to Liam, to the relief, the freedom from worry this would give him. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she remembered Maria's words. A lion may praise a sheep. What's the catch? She asked, her voice shaking slightly. What do you want from me in return? Alistair's smile vanished, replaced by that same look of intense, serious gravity from the diner. I want you to work on a project for me. A rehabilitation project. He paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. The project is my son. You will be placed on Julian's team. He is overseeing a new development in Hudson Yards. You will be his subordinate, officially. You will report to him. But your real report will be to me. I don't want you to be his friend. I don't want you to be his teacher. I want you to be exactly what you were in that diner, an unmovable object. A standard of integrity he cannot bully, he cannot buy, and he cannot break. He took a step closer. I have given my son every advantage, every tool except for one, a worthy adversary. A consequence. I believe that forcing him to work alongside someone who has already stood up to him, someone who owes her position, not to him, but to me, someone who embodies the character he so desperately lacks. It might be the only chance he has left to build a foundation of his own. Clara stared at him horrified. It wasn't a golden ticket. It was a sentence. He wanted to use her. He wanted to put her in a cage with the very man who had assaulted and humiliated her, and he wanted to watch what would happen. He was offering to save her life, but the price was to step back into the lion's den every single day. You're asking me to be bait, she said, the words tasting like ash. I'm asking you to be a benchmark, he corrected, his voice cold as the steel bolts in the rock beside them. I'm offering you the world, Miss Lawson. Your future, your brother's health. In return, I need your strength. The choice is yours. The wind on the cliffside was a wild, clean thing, whipping at Clara's worn jacket and clearing her head. Before her stood a man who held the keys to a kingdom she had only ever seen from the outside, and he was dangling them right in front of her. The structure they had just toured, a breathtaking marriage of audacity and engineering, seemed to pale in comparison to the structure of the offer he was now building in the air between them. I am offering you a path, Miss Lawson. Alistair Thorne, said his voice a low counterpoint to the rushing wind, one that bypasses the years of struggle, of debt, of fighting for recognition. I am prepared to fund the entirety of your remaining tuition at Cooper Union. Not a loan, a grant. Furthermore, I am offering you a paid senior-level internship at Thorn Global Properties. You would not be fetching coffee. You would be working alongside our lead design team on the Hudson Yards redevelopment. You will have access to resources, minds, and projects that will place you a decade ahead of your peers. Clara's world, which for years had been a precarious balancing act on a knife's edge, suddenly felt solid under her feet. The words washed over her, each one a balm on a deep, persistent wound. Tuition paid. The crushing weight of debt, the constant fear of not being able to finish her degree, vanished. Paid internship. An end to the grueling double life of waitress and student, an end to choosing between a new textbook and a decent meal. She saw for a dizzying second a future unburdened by financial terror. Then he delivered the final heart-stopping blow. I will also assume complete financial responsibility for your brother's medical care. All of it. The treatments, the consultations, the hospital stays. Whatever he needs from whomever he needs it, wherever in the world that may be. That was the moment her defenses crumbled. The image of Liam, not gaunt and tired in his small bedroom, but healthy and vibrant, flooded her mind. The constant sickening knot of dread in her stomach, the one that tightened every time the phone rang with a call from a doctor or an insurance agent, simply dissolved. Tears, hot and immediate, sprang to her eyes. It was a rescue. A miracle delivered by this cold, calculating man. It was too good to be true. She looked at him, her heart overflowing with a desperate, burgeoning hope. This man, for whatever reason, was her savior. She remembered Maria's warning, a faint echo from another lifetime. A lion may praise a sheep, but it's still a lion. Her nascent gratitude was tempered by a sliver of caution. Why she finally managed to ask, her voice thick with emotion. No one does something like this for nothing. What is the catch, Mr. Thorne? What could you possibly want from me in return? Alistair's expression remained unreadable, but a subtle shift occurred in his posture. The benevolent benefactor retreated, and the ruthless strategist returned. The warmth of the offer receded, replaced by the chill of a transaction. I do in fact require your services for a project, he said. A rehabilitation project of sorts. A structure that has been built with the finest materials, but suffers from a profoundly flawed foundation. He paused, letting the architectural metaphor settle before delivering its true meaning. The project is my son. The air rushed out of Clara's lungs. The beautiful future he had just painted cracked and shattered like fragile glass. What are you talking about? She whispered, though she already knew. You will be placed on Julian's team for the Hudson Yards project. Officially, you will be his subordinate, a junior member of his staff. You will attend his meetings. You will take his direction. Alistair explained, his tone clinical. But your true purpose will be different. Your real report will be to me. I don't want you to befriend him. I don't want you to counsel him. I want you to be precisely what you were in that diner, an unshakable standard. A presence of integrity. He cannot bully, he cannot buy, and he cannot break. He took a step closer, his shadow falling over her. I have spent a fortune and a lifetime trying to instill character in him. I have failed. I believe that forcing him into close professional proximity with someone who has already bested him, someone whose position is owed entirely to me, and is therefore untouchable by him, someone who embodies the principles he scoffs at. It may be the only chance he has left to develop a moral core. Clara stared at him, a cold, sickening horror creeping up her spine. This wasn't an act of generosity. It was an experiment, a cruel, manipulative game where she was the primary instrument. The helicopter, the architectural tour, the life-altering offer, it was all an elaborate prelude to this. He wanted to use her trauma, her strength, as a tool to fix his broken son. "You're asking me to be bait," she said, the words tasting like ash. The image of Julian's face, contorted with rage as he grabbed her arm, flashed in her mind. He wanted her to willingly walk back into that. "I'm asking you to be a benchmark," he corrected, his voice sharp. The horror curdled into fury. "No." She said the word, a small explosion. "Absolutely not. Do you have any idea what you're asking? That man assaulted me. He humiliated my friend. He is a walking embodiment of disrespect and entitlement. You want me to sit in an office with him every day, to subject myself to his arrogance and his temper, to wait for the moment he decides to lash out again. You aren't trying to build his character. You're using me as his punching bag." She expected him to be angry to rescind the offer. Instead, he simply watched her, his expression one of detached analysis. "Your reaction is precisely why you are the ideal candidate," he said calmly. "You see him for exactly what he is. You are not intimidated. I am not a lab rat." "Mr. Thorne," Clara shot back, her voice rising, "and my life, my brother's life, is not a pawn in your twisted family drama. The answer is no." She turned, ready to walk away, to find her own way back to the city, to her old life of struggle, which suddenly seemed infinitely preferable to this gilded cage. "Systemic lupus erythematosus," Alistair said, his voice stopping her dead in her tracks. "Your brother's specific diagnosis, it's particularly aggressive. The current regimen of corticosteroids is managing the symptoms, but causing long-term damage to his bones and organs. Your insurance provider, Aetna, has twice denied the claim for the experimental immunosuppressant therapy at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester. The therapy via Lumab has shown a 70% success rate in clinical trials for patients with his specific genetic markers. The out-of-pocket cost for the first year of treatment is approximately $580,000. Clara slowly turned back to face him, the fury drained out of her, replaced by an icy dread. He hadn't just done a background check. He had done a complete dissection of her life's most vulnerable point. He knew the name of the drug. He knew the clinic. He had laid her soul bare on a spreadsheet. It was the single most violating act she had ever experienced. "I had my office make inquiries this morning," he continued, his tone relentlessly impassive. "Without that treatment, his prognosis is managed decline. With it, he has a significant chance at a full and lasting remission. A normal life." He paused, delivering the final crushing blow. "The choice of whether he receives that treatment is now yours. It wasn't an offer. It was a hostage negotiation, and her brother was the hostage." The fight went out of her, leaving a hollow space filled with despair. He had her. He had cornered her so completely that every path of refusal led to a cliff's edge of guilt she could never survive. To deny Liam this chance for the sake of her own pride was unthinkable. She had always been his protector. She would not fail him now. She stood there for a long moment, the wind whipping around her, the silence stretching. In that silence, something inside her shifted. The despair began to burn away, forged by the heat of her anger, into something hard and resilient. Steel. If she was being forced into this game, she would not play it as a pawn. She would rewrite the rules. She lifted her chin, her eyes now dry and fierce, meeting his. "If I agree to this," she said, her voice low and controlled, "it will be on my terms, not yours." Alistair raised a single silver eyebrow, a flicker of genuine curiosity in his eyes. "I'm listening." First, she began ticking the point off on her finger, as if she were outlining a blueprint. "I am an architect in training, not a spy. My reports to you will be delivered weekly via email and will pertain only to project milestones, professional conduct, and the integrity of the work. I will not report on his personal life. I will not be your source for gossip or emotional drama. You will get the facts, nothing more." An efficient and professional arrangement, Alistair conceded with a nod. "Agreed." Second, my professional autonomy must be guaranteed. While I may sit below Julian on an organizational chart, I will have a direct and unimpeded line of communication to you and to the chief architect, Ms. Eleanor Vance. If your son attempts to sabotage my work, bury my designs, or professionally marginalize me, I will not be silenced by a chain of command that he controls. A wise and necessary stipulation. "Granted." "Third," she said, taking a breath and steadying herself for the most crucial point. "And on this, there is no negotiation. The arrangement is terminated immediately if Julian Thorne resorts to any form of physical intimidation or targeted abusive harassment. The moment he crosses that line, the one he already crossed in the diner, I walk. And your commitment to my brother's lifelong medical care remains. It becomes an irrevocable trust. That part of our deal must be unconditional ironclad and drafted by a top-tier contract lawyer of my choosing whose fees you will cover." She had laid it all out. She had taken his cold, manipulative offer and forged it into a shield. She had demanded respect, autonomy, and a safety clause that put the onus of failure squarely on his son while protecting the one thing that truly mattered. Alistair Thorne was silent for a long moment, studying her. The analytical mask was gone, replaced by a look of profound, undisguised astonishment that slowly bloomed into a broad smile. Then he laughed. It was not a polite chuckle. It was a deep, booming laugh that seemed to echo across the valley. "Magnificent," he declared, his eyes shining with genuine admiration. "Absolutely magnificent. I bring you to a cliff's edge, leverage your family's health, and present you with an impossible choice. And you don't just surrender, you counter-negotiate with the precision of a seasoned attorney. You build your own fortifications." He shook his head in wonder. "You, Miss Lawson, are the real deal." He extended his hand. "You have a deal, on every single one of your terms. Draw up the list of lawyers. My office will be in touch." Clara looked at his hand. Shaking it no longer felt like a surrender. It felt like an armistice, a treaty signed between two formidable powers. She placed her hand in his, and his grip was firm and final. A contract with the devil had been signed, but she had managed to write her own clauses in the fine print. The flight back was different. The city that sprawled below was no longer just a dream. It was a battlefield she was about to enter, armed with a billionaire's backing and her own unshakable will. Her last shift at the Gilded Spoon was a haze of poignant goodbyes. When she explained to Maria that she'd been offered an unbelievable internship, the older woman hugged her, her embrace smelling of cinnamon and strength. "I knew he saw fire in you, Clara," Maria whispered fiercely. "Just don't let that world of cold glass and sharp edges put it out. Remember the warmth of this place. Remember what you're made of." The next Monday, Clara rode a silent, brushed steel elevator, 60 floors into the sky. She stepped out into the cathedral-like quiet of Thorne Global Properties. It was a universe of polished concrete, seamless glass walls and hushed, focused energy. The only sound was the distant hum of the city below. After a brief orientation, she was led to a sleek white desk in a vast, open-plan space. Her eyes scanned the area, and then she saw him. Julian Thorne stood across the expansive room, leaning over a holographic model surrounded by his team. He looked confident, powerful, and utterly at home. He was a prince in his castle. Then his gaze swept across the office and snagged on her. The confident smile on his face froze, then melted away. His posture straightened his body, going rigid with disbelief. Clara watched as a kaleidoscope of emotions flickered across his face, utter shock, then confusion, which quickly curdled into a dark, familiar rage. He wasn't just looking at a new intern. He was looking at the living ghost of his most public and profound humiliation, inexplicably resurrected in the heart of his own empire. Clara held his gaze. She didn't smile. She didn't scowl. Her expression was one of placid, professional neutrality. Inside, her heart hammered against her ribs, but her exterior was a mask of calm resolve. She gave him a single deliberate nod, a minute almost imperceptible gesture of acknowledgement, a colleague to a colleague. The message, however, was as clear as the glass walls surrounding them. "I'm here. I'm not a waitress anymore. You don't control this, and I am not afraid of you." Julian's jaw tightened, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edge of the table. To everyone else, it was just a new employee starting her first day. But to the two of them, it was the opening bell of a war no one else knew had been declared. The game had changed, and Clara Lawson had just walked onto the board. Clara's story isn't just about a single act of defiance in a diner. It's about what happens next. It's a gripping reminder that true strength isn't about the power you're born with, but the character you build when you're tested. She stepped out of her world and into the lion's den, not as prey, but as a force of nature in her own right. This is where the real drama begins, a daily battle of wits and wills inside a corporate empire, with a brother's life and her own future hanging in the balance. Can integrity survive in a world of cutthroat ambition? Can a broken heir be rebuilt? Or will he try to destroy the one person who sees his cracks? If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of standing your ground, then please help us share it. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a story of courage, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. The next chapter of Clara's journey is one you won't want to miss.